Hello everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to the DM Roundtable for June 2020. This is a chance for patrons and I to get together and discuss topics in tabletop RPGs, and by sharing our ideas, thoughts, and experiences, we can all become better DMs and GMs. The DM Roundtable discussions are open to all patrons at every level of patreon.com/roguewatson. You don't even have to be an active participant. You can jump in here and lurk to your heart's content, and we are glad to have you. Shoutouts to Platinum patrons Andrew, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Nick, Andy, Chris, Alberto, Manuel, and Basil. And Gold patrons RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy Numa, Marcos, Dave, Vicente, Gilberto, Sean, AK, Cert2, B, Adam, Desert Lion, Sam, Mirage, Limpy Spuds, and Jerome. Thank you all very much for your support. This month's topic, as the winning vote in our poll, is resting. D&D's delicate balancing act is heavily tied to resting, and 5e introduces the short rest as a stopgap. How do we handle long and short rests in our campaigns? How do we balance having short rest and long rest based classes with different needs? How do we balance extended dungeon crawling or overland travel with constant long rests? And does Eric lament never playing 4th edition with its more video game inspired per encounter abilities? Joining me for this month's DM Roundtable, we have Corey.
Hello.
Marcos.
Hey, what's going on?
Jerome.
Hello.
And Oliver.
Hello.
Hello. So, I started playing, I technically played some 2nd edition, but really started seriously playing and DMing D&D at 5th edition, which has the long rest and the short rest. And I meant to look up the official rules for what they recommend for short resting, but some classes are tied to the long rest, so everybody has to, you prepare your spells if you're a spellcaster, or your, hit points get replenished on a long rest. Obviously, the long rest is huge, right? That's a main factor. And the short rest is designed to allow players to recover something in between. Corey, what is your experience with using rests in 5th edition or earlier editions, and how do you feel like 5th edition does it?
Well, I like how 5th edition you can have multiple classes that have a small amount of healing and not need a cleric in every party. That seems to be the big thing that I've taken out of it. In 2nd edition, we've always played with a cleric. Always. And I would say the majority of 3rd edition and the majority of my Pathfinder days, there was always a cleric as well. My group specifically, if nobody wanted to play the cleric, we usually allowed one person to play 2 characters. He could play a cleric just as a heal bot that traveled with the party.
Oh my gosh.
And just to make it work. So in this respect, 5th edition's got it better. But I would say it's the wave of this future that you can play pretty much any class you want, and you no longer need to have the heal bot around to keep the party alive.
Is that just because of the short rest system allowing you to spend hit dice so every character class can heal themselves?
Yeah, everybody's got hit dice. The fighter gets his little bonus once per battle. Characters, and the encounters we run tend to stay alive a little longer, just by able to heal themselves slightly. The healing potions in combat are basically useless. The lower level ones, anyway. I don't know what else to say. That high level potion that was supposed to be a poison potion in your campaign was an effective heal.
That's true.
Other than that, yeah.
I've seen potions be poured down unconscious people's throats before to get them to stand back up, so that could be useful in that regard. Just to force feed somebody.
Yeah.
Marcos, how do you feel about the balance of resting in 5th edition?
Well, it's overpowered. Like you said, it's to allow for people to be able to play whatever class they want to play. It's all about inclusiveness with 5th edition. But the long rest is overpowered. It's like the reset button.
Mm-hmm.
And anything that has a reset button is inherently, especially with, the role-playing games like this, it's overpowered. And it's up to the DM to balance it. If all you're fighting is goblins and you don't use an iota of your character's strength, and you're long resting after everyone, that's on the DM to balance that. I tend to run my encounters deadly. Combat is something to be feared. It's not just, oh, let me shoot my bow. Oh, I got hit in the shoulder. No, it's gritty. It's bloody. It's battle. And to that extent, if my characters take a long rest, it's because they've earned it. It's because they're playing smart and are taking a long rest in somewhere that is safe and secluded. If they drop down in the middle of a city street and say, I take a long rest, you better believe pickpockets are going to steal everything they own. They're going to get run over by chariots. They're going to get accosted by people. But if they play it smart, set up sentries, rest in a secluded position, prepare, I'm going to reward them for it, even if it might be, you know, not beneficial to me as the DM that they're doing this. If they play it smart and they deserve it, they're going to get it. But if they play it stupid, then I'm going to punish them for it right back.
And you bring up a good point, because I wish there were more firm rules about like where and when players can long rest. I know it says you can only get the benefits of a long rest every 24 hours, but time is such a nebulous factor anyway. I mean, all that's basically up to the DM. There's the funny thing about you can travel across the continent in 5 minutes and then have, a 5-minute battle take 4 hours. Time is a very tricky thing to keep track of, for starters. And then there's not really, it's not like the rule is you can only long rest in a city. It's like if a player's just going to try to get away with it where they can and how they can, and the DM has to then respond to that. I've been thankful so far, to use a recent example, that in the Tomb of the Nine Gods, the players have generally been pretty respectful of rests, to the point where I'm even shocked they haven't at least short rested more often, because I wouldn't impose any restrictions on a short rest. But yeah, when it comes to long rests, especially in a extended dungeon crawl, it feels like the DM has to introduce some kind of like punitive punishment almost, or some way of balancing it out. Because when I first looked at 5e, it felt like the concept of the short rest was to fix the problem of the reset button, of having it, we're in town, we're fully rested, now we're going to go out into the adventure, but the system doesn't want the players to long rest during that quote-unquote adventure. Now, unfortunately, adventure can mean all kinds of different things, but if we're looking at purely like almost like a JRPG, where it's like you're in town and you go to the dungeon, and you go back to town and you go to the dungeon, that's obviously very simplified. But they don't want you to long rest in the dungeon. In other words, they want you to mitigate your resources the whole time, and then what I thought would be to use those short rests in between. But then you have, what if your adventure has several dungeons or have several stages in between, or how do you factor that? Or what if you're running Tomb of Annihilation and there's no fucking towns in the entire campaign? Then there's no automatic safe haven, so you have to work out like your own rules for, or really what I ended up doing is just trying to track the player's progress and say, okay, well, they've been through a lot, they haven't rested in several sessions, now you're going to find like a safe grove or whatever, a bunch of lizard folk ranchers, I think I had at one point, just meet the players and be like, y'all look tired, and just let them get a long rest, because I don't know how else to do it. Jerome, how do you do it?
Well, it's kind of messy, because all the reasons why everybody just got to say. And, wow, I did take advantage of it. I don't like long rest. I think almost everybody doesn't, but hey, it's there. It's part of the rules. It's more narrative.
Yeah, I just wish there were very firm rules about it. Like I actually recently got a chance to interview the developers for Solasta, Crown of the Magister, which is an upcoming tactical RPG that uses the 5e rule set. And one of the things I asked the lead developer was, how do you handle resting in your game? Because in video games, a lot of times it's very easy to abuse the resting system. Now, obviously, games, a lot of them are more like Diablo-like, where you can just fight nonstop all the time. But it was still a concern. You know, I played Pillars of Eternity, and that one had more 4th edition rules where it had like per encounter abilities, which felt pretty good because, like Marcos was saying, you can tailor combat to be that much more challenging when your players know it is like do or die, and they don't have to worry about like, you know, oh, I need to save this until the last moment. They're like, oh no, I can just unleash all my shit. Well, that goes both ways. The DM can also, you know, unleash all their shit too, and I think that makes for really fun encounters. That's one reason I love the Divinity Original Sin series, because I think it does that very, very well. But in Pillars, at least with Pillars 2, you could rest whenever the hell you wanted. There were 0 restrictions for resting. Even the first Pillars, you could only have a certain amount of camping supplies, which was at least some kind of mechanic. You could only leave town, and you had a very strict cap. You could only have like 2, 3, or 4 camping supplies, and then that's how many essentially long rests you got before you were able to go back to town and get more. Now, you could find, you know, 1 or 2 during the course of the adventure, you know, as a loot item, but I thought that was actually a good system. And then they got rid of it in Pillars 2, and then you could just basically rest as long as you had any kind of food item. But food was like Skyrim, where it was food fucking everywhere. You know, like a piece of cheese, you could use that as your one item for your long rest. So it just kind of threw the whole balance of the game out of whack because you never had to mitigate any of your systems, and it was really unfortunate. And I'm going off on a tangent, but the Solasta devs said that it's
like Skyrim.
Yeah, they specifically used food as a long rest mechanic, and because it's a video game, obviously you can track specifically what food the players have, which is similar to what Pillars 1 did. So it takes an actual finite resource and says you have to have 1 ration per party member in order to long rest. And I think the game had its own internal clock system, or he alluded to that, where it would track the fact that you can only take a long rest every 24 hours. So it sounds like they were going to be really more faithful to the rules. But I thought, because that's something that we never keep track of in our games, were the rations, because that just seemed too fiddly. And like, well, I'm not going to... And I don't know how many people actually keep track of... I don't know if any of you keep track of rations or carrying capacity or any of that kind of stuff, but...
I'm guilty.
It just depends on the group.
Yeah.
You know, if they don't care, then, you know, we'll find another solution to it.
Yeah. But the ration thing that gave me pause, because I was like, that's actually an interesting mechanic. If you give players a finite supply of something, and there was, you know, we have that discussion in the Discord channel about, like, there was somebody that only allowed their players 3 long rests while they were in the Tomb of the Nine Gods, and they told the players that, like, at the front. It's like, hey, you've got time for 3 long rests. And then that made the players, you know, be organized and ration out their resources, which is pretty cool. And the way you could do that without having to literally tell the players that is that they have that many, you know, of that ration resource going into the dungeon, so they know, okay, we can do it this many times. While still, I would still hopefully tell the players, you still can't abuse this system. Even though you've got 3 rations, you're still limited to the nebulous every 24-hour resting, because and that's really up to the DMs at that point. It's like, well, and players will ask you, how much time has elapsed? You're like, well, I don't know. You guys looked around a room and fought 1 battle. It's been like, you know, fucking 30 minutes.
10 minutes.
Yeah.
You're also lucky that you don't have Manics have 5th level spells. You have Magnificent Mansion and all those other things that wizards could screw you over with.
Yeah, I suspect that's a reason a lot of people don't get into higher level D&D, because spells just fucking break the game so badly.
They break the game if you let it break the game.
That's true. We could have a higher level DM roundtable discussion for sure. I would not be able to say a damn thing because I have
No, I firmly believe it. Like it's gloves off when the levels get higher. You take off them gloves as a DM and you crack your knuckles. It's time to start to throw down.
All right. Well, you should be excited for our next. I'm going to drop a little bit of tease here, but you should be excited for our next campaign after Tomb of Annihilation.
Oh, snaps!
You heard it here first.
Kalinor returns. Kalinor's coming back. I'm calling it right now.
Fan favorite. Go ahead, Jerome. What were you saying?
Chris is running it, right?
I can neither confirm nor deny what's going to happen yet.
Well, because you said you're taking kind of a break because of Heather giving birth.
Yes.
So,
Well, we would all take a break in general for sure. Like there would be a bit of a pause in the, which I think we've been running for about 2 years with Tomb now, so I think we're due for a bit of a gap here. But yes, I haven't made any firm announcements yet, but I am excited about trying some high-level D&D play. But to get back onto resting, and yes, and balancing is obviously a big part of resting. Do you ever run into it, and this is just an open question, do you ever run into a situation of, I guess specifically if you have warlocks or monks, or help me out, are there any other short rest classes who just want to fucking short rest all the time, and do you just allow the party to short rest all the time?
I always make them roll random, or I always roll random encounters.
Even for a short rest?
Yeah, that's the second edition solution. You could rest for 8 hours, then stop and rest again for 8 hours, but there was always the random encounter. There was usually a percentage dice or 1 on a d6, and that would be interrupting their long rest. The dungeon I'm running now for my group has every floor has its own chart, and it's usually every half an hour you roll on the chart to see if there's a random encounter.
Boy.
So, I mean, it's by Frog God Games. It's called Rapinathic.
Ah. Oh, I heard of that.
Yeah, that's what we're running right now. So they're 3 or 4 levels deep. There's no easy way back to town. Nobody's got teleport or anything like that. They had a spellcaster who had Tiny Hut. He's dead now.
I made sure of that.
Well, I didn't make sure of it, but I was pleasantly surprised when he was dead. So, so they take their risks. Usually, what they'll do is they'll find a secret door or something in the dungeon that I can reasonably say that the other denizens of the dungeon that are still alive either don't know it's there or they're wary of that area, and that'll be their chance to long rest. But if they abuse it and go back there multiple times, then it's time for an ambush or something along those lines.
Do they have to find those safe spots? Because a short rest... Okay, so in 5th edition, a long rest is 8 hours. I think with at least 6 hours have to be like actual sleeping. I think there's specific rules about that. And then the short rest is an hour of like just chilling, basically.
Like a
good
comedian would say, is you have time for a Valley Ollies and a nap.
Yeah. So, I think I would allow people to short rest generally when they want, where they want. Obviously somebody, like, you can't short rest like on the other side of a door from enemies. Like, that seems stupid, right? Like, you do have to find a safe place. But I do think the short rest is the response to not letting your players have to, completely exit the dungeon and then long rest. That being said, I have also let my players obviously long rest in the middle of dungeon. I mean, hell, I've done Princes of the Apocalypse and now Tomb of Annihilation, both campaigns that feature mega huge dungeons that I don't think it's possible to do without multiple long rests involved, or your party just leaving and then coming back. And I am torn between running all those extra encounters, but also that slows things down a lot. And I know one solution is like, well, make it part of the story. Make the fact that, the thing that they were going to do, like, tell them, hey, you're running out of time to do this. And if, like, the person you're rescuing, if you long rest, they could be killed or something. That's something I have a hard time trying to wrap my head around as a DM also, because I'm coming so much from a video game background where, the world waits for the player, right? Everything is just kind of, it's like a stage play or something. Everybody just kind of waits around for their turn to interact, and then when the audience gets there, okay, now we're activated. Trying to create an actual real world that's happening, along the scenes is a tricky thing to do.
Yeah, it's almost like the first Dead Rising, where you can go anywhere and do anything you want, but there's that timer on the side where it's like, hey, if you want to do this, the time to do it is getting less and less and less until the time has passed.
Yeah.
Um, you know, the same thing when it kind of when it comes to rests, and you know, pushing things that you want for the players to do into the dungeon. Luckily, that they kind of go hand in hand when it comes to you want to rest, but you know you got this thing that you need to do. As long as it makes sense and the players know the type of urgency that they need to have, um, you know, you can work with whatever you need to, but as long as it makes sense, at least to me, you know, if you want to take a long rest, I mean, if you're in the, you know, if you're in a jail cell and everybody's locked up and you have the keys, you can technically take a long rest right there, but you know, you need to do something in a few hours. You know, it's all about the player's prerogative and knowing, you know, at least the players knowing what they need to be doing, so that way they can make their best decision. And if they make a bad decision, that's on them. Random table, or they miss out on the quest.
Here's a good question that I've had. How do you handle like you roll a random encounter during their rest? Is it?
Yep.
I mean, I have multiple questions about this. As you can probably imagine, like, do you worry about them setting up guards? Do you catch them all asleep, unconscious? Is it automatic surprise? Are they interrupted before, in the middle of, or after?
So we track watches. So because everybody needs at least 6 hours, you're going to have 4 people take a watch to make sure everybody gets their full rest. And so I just roll for the first watch, it'll be for 2 hours. So then on the floor they're on right now in the dungeon, it's once every half hour. So I roll 4d20. And if a random encounter comes up on that guy's watch, I'll see what comes up on the chart. If it's something as silly as a war rat scouting, we'll do opposed passive perception versus my rat stealth, or vice versa. And if I roll something really ugly, it'll be up to the guy who's on watch to make his perception check, or it's surprise party. Nice try, and we'll go from there.
Make sure you have alert.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
So it's always during the rest. So the players have not gotten the benefit of the long rest yet, correct?
No. And if there's a random encounter and it interrupts their rest, they have to start all over again.
Holy crap.
Yep.
Yeah, but do you just let them then try again?
Well, it depends. If depends who they run into. If it's just one of the random dungeon denizens like a gelatinous cube, he's not going to go and warn anybody. But if it was the war rat and the monster is intelligent, and you know maybe that's the enemy on the level, he'll go inform some people, and yeah, they won't be surprised when the players show up. That's for sure.
Yeah. It's interesting. Marcos, do you have an opinion on random encounters during long rests?
Oh no, I totally agree with it.
Yeah.
Again, the overarching theme for me is if it makes sense. You know, if they're in the middle of a, you know, barren, lifeless desert, and I know that there's nothing in this desert, just no point in me rolling around the table. Go to sleep, you wake up, you got sand in your pants, but you know you're okay. You know, but if like you said, if you're in the middle of a dungeon and it's like, oh, I want to take a nap. Ooh, if I'm rolling a 1d6, and if I get a 3, 4, 5, 6, you know, there's a patrol that you didn't notice coming around the corner.
Yeah, it's an active environment. There's, you know, it's a dungeon, but that doesn't mean everybody's sitting in their room playing cards waiting for adventurers to show up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now,
There's stuff going on.
And if the party is smart and says we look for signs of, you know, patrols, we sit still for 10 minutes and see, you know, if we see anybody coming by. You know, if they play it smart, then I can, you know, oh, okay, well, you're playing it smart. You know, now it's only a 4, 5, or 6. Now it's only a 5 and a 6.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah,
you've done all this to try to get this done? You're using spells and using supplies to try to get this? Okay, you're on a 6. You know, I don't tell them that. You know, I roll secretly, you know, and ask, hey, give me your perception check. To them, they don't know if a, you know, freaking gargoyle is going to jump from the ceiling at them, you know, but I know that, hey, they've done everything they need to do. There's a really low chance.
Yeah. How do you all, jumping off the high level spells suck commentary, how do we handle spells that are designed to put the players in relative safety during a rest? Like the latest bane of my existence, Leomund's tiny hut.
Again, like if the players, that's a third level spell, so
Yeah.
that's something you can kind of get a little early on. Again, it kind of depends on the situation. If they're in the middle of nowhere, the bad guy's not looking for them. They might be able to get away with it, depending on the situation. But I've definitely had situations where it's like you do it in a dungeon, thinking that you're safe. Okay, the bad guys are waiting outside your hut with
Yeah.
arrows trained. You lower your hut, you got 17 goblins with short bows pointing it all at you. And then the head goblin walks up, hand behind his back, strolling. Saying, "All right, so do you surrender, or are we gonna kill you guys? What do you want to do?" You felt safe,
Yeah.
but now it's like you got all your spells back, but now it's a deadly encounter because you decided to think you were safe in this bubble. Same thing for higher level spells too. That magnificent mansion. Sorry, if you got the spells and stuff to do that, you're probably dealing with a bad guy who also has access to things like that. Suddenly, you got a bad guy taking 2 bags of holding, casting divination spells to find out where you're at and saying, "Hey, guess what, guys? Sucks to be you," and throwing bags of holding at you in your magnificent mansion. Stuff like that happens depending on what level you're at and what you're doing.
Balance-wise, it almost seems more effective to always do the ambush or the encounter after the long rest, unless you really are trying to like, oh man, they're really low on health, this is a dangerous position, let me try and jump them one last time, see if I can down somebody. But if you get them after the long rest, now you've started draining their resources for the whole next adventuring day. So I do like the concept of like planning an ambush after they actually do their long rest. And then, because if you do an encounter before, the players, again, depending on the situation, but they could just say like, well, we know we're immediately going to get a long rest in like 2 seconds, so we just unleash all of the rest of our shit during this encounter, and then we'll get our long rest. Although you, as you all alluded to, you make them roll again, and I guess they could keep getting more encounters from there, or just keep bringing the wrath of the dungeon down on them, which is something I guess I hadn't done that before. I think I usually roll the encounter, and then we just do it, and then we do the long rest, and that's been unsatisfying for that reason. But if I can set up an ambush right after the long rest, now suddenly I've started draining into their next resource. And yes, they can start saying, oh, well, I'm fresh, I can start shooting my spells. Well, yes, you can, but now you're that many fewer spells for your next adventuring day.
Yeah, and it's not like you can just wake up, walk around for 10 minutes, do a fight, and be like, "Ooh, I'm tired, time for bed."
Exactly.
You've
Yeah.
been up for 20 minutes. It's 8:20 in the morning. You're gonna go back to bed right now?
Right.
Oh no, buddy. You got a whole day ahead of you.
Yeah. And that's the 10-minute adventuring day problem with D&D, is like a lot of, it's a weird thing. That time is such a weird thing to wrap your head around in a tabletop RPG for that reason, because you play combat for so long, and everybody's like, man, how long time has it been? It's like, well, you've been through these 3 rooms, you set off 1 trap, and you fought 1 battle. It's been 2 hours or something. The only time I really got into that was, I think, in Omu, to use Tomb of Annihilation as an example, where we were really trying to keep track of the time at one point, and we really had to backpedal and be like, okay, how much time does it take for you to get from point A to point B? And that was a weird case where they weren't technically in a dungeon. It was like a region, but I kind of treated the region like a dungeon. So, but they had the hut to rest in. But I was trying to figure out, okay, when they are trying to look at long resting, how long has it been, and when can I let them long rest again? And I think in general, no DM or few DMs are going to be really strict about it. Be like, it's been 21 hours, fuck you, and really shut it down. But it's annoying that the D&D system of resting causes that kind of animosity between DM and player, and I don't know the solution to that. I find it kind of inherently dissatisfying for that reason, and I don't want to go off a rant about D&D, but I love systems, and I haven't played many tabletop RPGs, so I have to use video games that just let me use my shit whenever I want to, with their own built-in balancing, which is cooldowns usually, right? If you're looking at like MMOs, I'm playing Xenoblade Chronicles right now, and it's just I've got 6 or 7 or 8 skills, and they're all based on cooldowns. And some of them are really quick cooldowns that can do a lot, and some of them are like a minute cooldown, so it's basically like once or twice a fight, and that feels pretty fun. And Divinity Original Sin was the same way. Everything was just pure cooldown based. You had to choose which skills you wanted to equip. You couldn't have everything equipped, which was really cool. It was based on like your stats, but you could unleash everything. I didn't have to worry about, oh man, I've only got 4 fireballs. Do I want to use one here? And where's my next long rest? Like, that just isn't a fun or satisfying system for me as a player. So when I'm a DM, I empathize. Like and honestly, we do kind of run a more superhero game compared to a more gritty. I know that I got no.
And at the end of the day, that is the issue with Dungeons and Dragons. You're playing a superhero.
Yeah.
And playing a superhero, you want to feel like a superhero.
Yes, that's a good point.
You want to be a superhero as much as you can, as much as you want to be.
Yeah.
So that long rest is to facilitate you being a superhero. I don't know if you guys ever play a Spy Hunter, but that grim and perilous game system is like the opposite of Dungeons and Dragons. You play a peasant trying and striving against a world of terror and terribleness. But because of that, the resting system is completely overhauled and different. It's based on your provisions. It's based on your skills. It's based on there's so many different things that are put in place that facilitate you resting and getting your things back, or getting your skills back, being able to do more things, because you're not a superhero. You're random Joe down the road who got thrust into this position because your village burned down, or because the freaking corruption decided it wanted to take your mom. Whatever it is. So the conversation that we're having is inherently like this because Dungeons and Dragons is just a system built around being a superhero, being as strong as you can and saving the day. You can't do that if you're struggling with your spell slots. If you're struggling with always being on the brink of death because you can't get that rest in. It's just the system. It's all the system. It is,
and I feel like a better system, if we really want to use the superhero thing, which I think is true. Like, that's how at least baseline D&D is really played. That you go from being, already better than a farmer at level 1 to like punching gods in the face at level 20. Maybe instead of having things come back on a rest, you should just do all the shit you want. But then if you expend, have a certain amount, and then if you go beyond that, or you want to do things too much, you start accruing like exhaustion, or you start losing hit points to simulate the fact that, superheroes get tired, right? They just get beat up, like physically and emotionally. They can keep going, but they just get more and more like drained. So you could kind of push yourself that way.
And that's one of the alternate rules for resting. The realistic setting where a short rest is 8 hours and a long rest is a week. I haven't had the chance to play that in the game.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
But that's
punishing. Wow.
Yeah, that's how you take Dungeons and Dragons and you de-escalate it from superhero to you're a peasant with a pitchfork. You do the gritty realism where every fight that you have is life or death, just like it is in real life. It's life or death. You get poked once with a sword, and you got to sit down for a week, so that way you don't die of disease.
True, yeah.
Is
that balanced? Because a fighter, you could go a long time without a long rest, but like a wizard. Like, is that even fun to play a wizard that you can't long rest very often? I mean, I guess if you're playing like a really low magic world where like nobody has magic and it takes so much to cast, then maybe, but...
It's like those wizards that say, don't cast a spell, use your skills, until you only cast spells when you're allowed to.
Yeah.
Well, wasn't that the idea behind the cantrip system? That the cantrip allows a wizard to have at least, the same damage capability as a fighter.
That's true.
I don't know how well that works because a fighter's, a straight up fighter is getting 3 attacks at whatever his damage is, versus the wizard's one shot and you miss, and then you got to wait till your next turn.
That's a good question. Yeah, I don't know where the balance is in terms of.
But then again, it all comes into ability score increase and your ability modifier. Wizard, by the time a fighter has 3 attacks, a wizard's going to have a plus 13, to their firebolt. It does 3d10, 4d10 damage. Just base, not even including if you have any like special class levels or anything and something else. It's equalized based on the burst as opposed to the fighter more of a slow burn.
Consistent, yeah.
Yeah.
I
Well,
wonder
they've definitely
what the
done. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna. I wonder what the average is for like how often a wizard should be using a spell slot per encounter breaks down to.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I remember
Yeah.
playing in a campaign, one of my early 5th edition ones, where we were unable to rest in the dungeon, and it was meant to be a one-shot. So you were careful. You didn't spend a spell slot unless you thought it was absolutely necessary. So, I can remember going entire sessions just using cantrips for damage, and then saving those spell slots for when you really needed that rope trick to get in the short rest or what have you.
And was that satisfying? Was that fun?
I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I think it was more because it was the one shot module was very entertaining. I believe it was like it was Minds of Madness from some really old con, but it was very entertaining.
I will say I do like the cantrips. I think was that 3rd edition introduced cantrips.
They had orisons and 0 level spells you could cast, but they were a lot weaker.
Okay, it was like light and
Acid splash for a D3 acid damage.
yeah, like really okay.
Very small.
Yeah, and that's a good point about cantrips. I do think that is a good. At least let wizards do the wizard thing without having to, spend spell slots constantly. I could go off on a whole rant about how I don't find spell slots a super satisfying system either in D&D. That could be another DM round.
Yeah,
discussion.
that's leftovers from the Vancian magic system for the plaguing
God,
D&D
that
for
terrible,
years.
like you memorize a spell and then forget the spell or some bullshit. Like that is.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
Wait! You want to
I
cast
determine
fireball
that
5 times?
somebody-
You better prepare 5 fireball spells.
Yeah, that's so dumb.
I just term it as you don't have the mental capacity to cast the spells anymore. You know them.
It's like everybody's reading from
Eric,
the Necronomicon.
I think you'd really enjoy like a different RPG system. Maybe something like Ironsworn
Yeah.
or something like Zweihander, Grim and Perilous, something like that, where it's like a different take on everything.
Yeah.
Spells, all that. I think you might enjoy that. It's just a breath of fresh air.
Yeah, for different. I mean, I like a lot of what DM does. I like how 5th edition does simplify a lot of those systems, but the actual balancing act for, monster balance is, I think, a nightmare. And I don't want to say I wish things were more like a video game, because that sounds like a terrible fucking thing to say. But I do look at how 4th edition worked and think like, man, this actually almost seems like something I would have enjoyed more. Being able to, I don't know why we went from per encounter to like short rests, because
it was just very streamlined. But some people
Yeah.
didn't want to be on those railroads of streamline. People wanted to do whatever they want. Hence the superhero-ness of 5th edition. Enough people complained and cried about 4th edition that the developers were like, you know what? You want to do whatever you want? We're going to give you a game to do whatever you want.
Yeah, which I do like a lot of the freedom, and I like that the player characters are. I guess we're talking about 5th edition in general now, but the characters are more baked in and have more power inherently. Although on the flip side of that is we lose a lot of the joy of getting magic items, for example, because everybody, like very few characters, need magic items at any of these levels. I guess the resting conversation is just intrinsically tied to the balancing of D&D, which is always such a tricky thing to cover. Yeah, I mean, I think short rests are fine whenever assuming you're not resting on the other side of a monster den or something. Playing a partial warlock in Storm King's Thunder, I was very aware of short resting, which I liked the warlock in 3.5. I think they added the warlock.
Yep, I believe that's right.
Yeah.
and I thought it was a cool class. And then in 5th, they did the whole short rest thing, and it's like, okay, you're basically a wizard, but you only get 2 spell slots, but you get them back constantly, in theory. Depending on how often the rest of the team agrees to a short rest, or the DM lets you get a short rest. So it's a very weird system where suddenly, some parties might not care that much about a short rest if they're a bunch of, long rest classes, main spellcaster. Yes, you get hit points back, obviously, but still. And then other classes like the monk and the warlock are like, okay, we just had an encounter, we got a short rest right now, or I'm going to be not very useful. And it's a weird system. I would have rather just been like, okay, I can use these 2 spells per encounter. That's just so much of an easier system for me, and especially for those kind of characters, rather than having to negotiate with the rest of the party. Like, hey, can we kind of chill here and get a short rest real quick, guys?
Yeah, I don't know how they'd fix that unless they allowed every class to have a short rest, something that they could gain back that gave them an advantage. Because we run into the same problems. The cleric and the druid and the wizard. Well, the wizard gets one little thing back.
Yeah, the
per
arcane
short
recovery
rest.
thing. Yeah.
But the druid and the cleric are waiting for that 8 hours, and the warlock's ready to go,
Mm-hmm.
and the monk has got all his key points back, but they're at the whims of the 8-hour rest guys. Yeah, that's part of the issue, I guess.
Yeah, like different classes now suddenly have very different needs, so it makes it bizarre to do the whole resting negotiation with the rest of the party too, which is, and you know what? I find myself more drawn to the short rest classes because I want to use my stuff more often. I want to have those cool abilities at hand, and I don't want to have to ration my own abilities that much. So that just tells me that like some classes I'm just not going to enjoy as much as others, and I wish that everybody had some more, I guess, short rest systems. We need to play a different RPG. as folks are alluding to. But I do like D&D for all it's got. And it's got a lot of fun resources available, which is good. All right, what about final thoughts for resting? I feel like we've covered just about everything, but Corey, lay it on me. Resting, I'm not gonna say pro or con. Nobody's. That's not really a system for that. But just what are your final comments on resting in D&D?
Well, I'm gonna say I like what they've done somewhat. I haven't really changed the way I DM from 2nd edition through Pathfinder and 3.5 to now. I still like to play dungeons where it's not balanced. If the 3rd floor is not filled with challenge rating 3 monsters, you're just as likely to run into a challenge rating 15 monster on the same floor. And the idea is you don't fight that at your level. You take notes, swear vengeance, and come back when you can handle it. And yeah, good luck with the long rest, because if you're resting in a corridor in a dungeon, somebody's going to come along in the next 4 hours and disturb you. You better be hiding behind a secret door that's been triple spiked. And yeah, that's all I have to say about it.
Yeah, you heard it here first. Do not rest in a corridor. Do not spend 8 hours setting up tents in a hallway. Marcos, resting in D&D.
What, you mean you can't set up a tent in a hallway and nobody's gonna bother you? What? Yeah. No, for me it's all on the DM. It's all you should know as a DM that your players are going to want to abuse that as often as possible. And it's up to you to teach your players that, hey, you can try, but you need to play it smart. If you go about things in an idiotic way, I'm gonna smack you into the ground. I'm gonna grind my heel into the back of your head into that dirt. But if you play things smart, I'm gonna work with you, and I'm gonna reward it. It's all on the DM about balancing it.
That's good. Jerome.
Well, it just some people just said what I was going to say, but
Great minds.
I try to with the mechanic. I think I try to do the as I said, it was messy. It was use their hit die. They roll their hit die for their long rest, what they get back, and that's what you get. Sorry.
How does that work? They get rolled their hit die.
Roll their hit die. What they get for their short rests, and if they use them during their short rest, well, you don't get nothing.
That's strict.
Well, I tried it. They were kind of grumbling about it, but hey, they
Gotta
get
teach
half
them.
their back. No,
Yeah.
but they get half it back when they rest. It's
Yeah, I will say that I seem to almost have an unspoken covenant with my players where I'm generally pretty easy on the resting. I'm not super restrictive about it. But on the other hand, my players also don't tend to abuse it. They usually
Yeah,
do a pretty good job of going pretty long, through dungeons or pretty far in the adventuring day, and they'll short rest occasionally, or even a lot of times they won't stop to short rest at all. They'll just keep going. So in that respect, I think we almost have, that's the other side of the coin. If my players were abusing it a lot, then I think I would have to respond to that in kind. But because they really haven't at all, that I'm generally pretty easy on it. So whenever they ask to like long rest at a spot, or I think they can almost tell like, okay, this is like, the time for long rest, like that, after a big boss battle or something, like, okay, we're getting a long rest after this, and sure enough they do, and I'm not gonna fuck with them after that. So it is definitely up to the DM, and I feel like at least with my group we have a pretty good, almost unspoken understanding for how often rests need to happen. Although I'm still shocked they don't short rest more often, frankly.
Nah, your players are just masochistic.
yeah.
Yeah.
My players did not short rest because of that. They're just like, okay, we're just long resting now.
It's very
We'll
weird.
follow
Like
this place.
you guys can short rest. It's okay. I'm not gonna
Yeah, you
do
can
anything
do that
bad.
now. I'm sorry.
Just scared him too much. Excellent. All right.
Uh,
Well, thank you all so much for joining me. Thank you to Corey, Marcos, Jerome. Oliver was sitting in with us, which was fun, for joining for this month's DM Roundtable. I am Eric. We hope to see you all again for next month's DM Roundtable discussion.
all right. See you later.
Bye.
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 Hey,